Welcome today to this tech talk on understanding ERP and Mint Advantage. So the tech talk is going to be hosted by Beth. Before I hand over to Beth, I'm just going to do an introduction. And I am just going to go quickly through the guidelines and antitrust guidelines. If you do have any questions, please feel free to unmute the lines at the end. I have a couple of questions that I'll ask first of all, and then I'll unmute the lines. If you would rather ask any questions in the chat box, just go ahead and type them there, and I'll keep an eye out for any questions coming in on chat. So to introduce Beth, she is a manager within Tracing's Centre of Excellence. She's been with the company for 8 years, so most of which she spent as a senior technical consultant, interfacing with many members of the life sciences supply chain. She has over 15 years experience in the supply chain, logistics, EDI and B2B. And this tech talk, as mentioned, is understanding ERP and the Mint Advantage. So just she's going to be exploring a day in the life of an ERP system user and how Mint can simplify daily challenges. So on to the antitrust guidelines. As always, our courses are public, so we just ask you not to engage in any discussions around pricing, deal making, selling, promoting, or any other activities which could be seen as anti-competitive. If you feel the discussions are approaching these boundaries, just say so, and we will stop the discussion until Tracing Legal Counsel is consulted before proceeding. And as for our class guidelines, because they are public and limited to an allotted time frame, we just ask you to refrain from initiating any discussions about company-specific examples. On that note, though, if you do have any questions, any use cases you'd like to explore, just I'll say the email that you can email us on at the end of the session, so we can take any of those discussions offline. So thank you so much, Beth. I'm over to you. I'm just going to turn off my video now.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here today. So at first, I'm going to dive into a little bit about ERP. What is ERP and enterprise resource planning? And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that users face in that. And then going from there, how can Mint help? So just kind of an overview of what is ERP. Even if you don't have ERP, but you're running a business, you probably do some aspect of this today. So typically what happens, maybe from a manufacturing perspective, a contract manufacturer, a wholesaler, any of those positions, you have some sort of planning aspect. Maybe you're building something. Personally, I come from a manufacturing background where we built large machinery. And so there would be a plan of what purchases do you have? What are you building? What do you need to make today? So you'll have a plan of products, of components that you need, of pieces to your puzzle. What inventory do you have in stock? And if you don't have it in stock, what do you need to purchase? And then once you purchase something, when do you need it to arrive? Do you need to come in sooner? Does it need to come in later? Once it's arrived at your dock, there's some sort of receiving aspect that's often kind of considered part of the process of things. And then once it's received, then you're probably going to have to pay for it, unfortunately. So throughout this whole cycle, you kind of rinse and repeat. Every single day you come in, what do I need to buy today? Let me buy it. Is it coming in on time? Is it not? Great. Is it here? Awesome. And then it goes on to the invoicing and again, around and around. On top of all that, there are some business constraints that you may face. The three primary ones that I worked with a lot was money, time, and space. So from a money perspective, unfortunately, we don't have unlimited funds throughout all the businesses and all the factors of our day-to-day life. So you have money coming in and money going out. While you're building something, your customers are that are buying things from you, you're building, they probably pay you when you're done, when you deliver, but you still need to pay for the components you buy along the way. Time, how long does it take to build this thing? How soon do you need to do you deliver it to your customers? And then finally, space. For the manufacturing company that I worked for, we'll get into a little bit later, but we built very large machinery. It was the size of like a small conference room. So we couldn't have more than one of them on a dock. But you see this challenge throughout all of the industries of what do you have for inventory space? You can't have unlimited storage space. You have to pay for it. So these three components of money, time, and space kind of overlay all the challenges that people may face from the planning, purchasing, and expediting process that we see in the business of day-to-day life. On top of all of that is this concept of inventory management. So again, when you're dealing with really big things, they're often really, really expensive. So if you buy something that's really fancy, that's really expensive or really big, then that's money that you are paying for up front, but your customers may not be paying you until down the road. So you want to bring that into the very last moment of your inventory process so that you can turn around that money and have a better cash flow. It also lowers the cost of inventory when you're doing something like just-in-time inventory, reduces your lost or damaged product because you don't physically have it for very long. But some of the major challenges of that process is that you need to have reliable supply chains with really, really excellent quality. There aren't a whole lot of room for errors when you're getting something at the very last minute. Maybe it's really big, maybe it's really expensive, and then it's scratched or it doesn't work or the quality is not up to par. You now have to send it back to get a replacement, but the time it takes to make this component in the first place can be pretty high. And so you don't have a whole lot of time to get a new product in and still meet the deadlines of your downstream customers. Finally, you need to have really accurate forecasts, both from your inbound customer requests and your outbound processes going down the line. And then on top of all of that, as I mentioned, some of the complex parts, they go through multiple steps before they get received for use, specifically in the supply chain industry that I came in. So even if you ordered something, it may not be ready for use at your production line until it goes through multiple other steps, which means you have multiple schedules that you need to maintain throughout the whole process of ordering, expediting, delivery, quality, receiving, all of those different components that I spoke about a little bit earlier. Now, to dive deep into my semiconductor experience, I worked for a contract manufacturing company, and those two large-looking machines you see in the middle of the page were some of the most painful parts that I had to manage as a buyer. Now, each one of those things was probably about 8 feet tall and maybe 10 or 12 feet long. They did fit in your standard, tractor trailer you see going down the highway. They didn't need a wide load sign, but they were logistically a challenge. As you can see, there's two different models there. So from our customer's perspective, our customer bought these machines from us. They usually gave us a timeline, maybe 6 or 7 orders at a time, and they would have it scheduled out monthly or so. But the real tricky thing is sometimes they would swap based on the forecast that they had. So sometimes they would say, I need that top model in July and the bottom one in August. And then you give it a month and they change their mind and say, I need that top one in August and the bottom one in July. Now, as the planner of these frames, I would have to coordinate with the person who made them for us. There was a sheet metal factory in Montreal, Canada, who produced these machine frames for us. They did all the sheet metal on the outside. And then it would get delivered to a plastic company in Massachusetts that was down the road from our manufacturing facility, where they would do some of the inner components, the windows that would see on there, a couple other aspects of it. But I had to plan that delivery process. Because these are big, they're financially expensive, so we couldn't have too many of them floating around just because the inventory cost of that. I have to deal with cross-border customs paperwork, the time it takes to manage them, to build them, to reschedule the deliveries on them at not only our facility, but more importantly, the plastics facility. So every time our customer said, hey, I want to switch the models of this, or hey, can you get one of these sooner? I had my handy dandy spreadsheet that I'm sure many of you are familiar with that would coordinate the deliveries. I had it color coded. I had it as a calendar. I would send it over to the manufacturing company in Canada and say, can you meet this new delivery schedule? If not, how close can you get to it? Once I had their confirmation of the deliveries, I would send it to the plastics company and say, hey, can your dock be empty on these days so that we can have this machine frame come in and you can do your component of it? And once I had their confirmation of their schedule, sometimes it didn't agree, and there's a whole negotiation process that we need to go through. But once we have that side of it finalized, I needed to call up the trucking company so that I could do that final step you see on the right there, from the manufacturing plant in Chelmsford to our delivery site in Dracut. And you can probably see the little river that goes through there that we had to get over. There's about 4 bridges that go from one side to another. So even that was a little bit of a challenge because you logistically are going through maybe not the widest roads that we're taking this machinery down through. And this was something I dealt with every single day as a buyer planner. Every day I would come in and say, did we have a new delivery? Great. Okay. Now we have to go through the process all over again, or it's following up along the way to make sure that these frames are still going to be delivered on time. For our manufacturing site, we had room for maybe 2 or 3 of these frames, but certainly no more than that. So I had to constantly be on the phone with the manufacturer of the frames to make sure that their deliveries were on time and in full. Obviously, we couldn't take a partial frame as it was going through the process, but to make sure that they weren't seeing any delays, or more importantly, that they weren't ahead of schedule, because then we would have potentially too many of them on our dock. So as you can imagine, and I'm sure many of you are seeing today, it's a challenging process. There's a lot of aspects that go into the supply chain that we probably don't think about today unless you're readily involved in it. And that's just an anecdote from my life in the manufacturing side of it, from the semiconductor world. But we see a lot of the same thing from the life sciences. There's the typical constraints of money, time, and space. You have to manage the inventory of thousands of bottles, of boxes, and commonly supplies that are going to fill up your inventory shelving, both in for the product that you're manufacturing that are empty, and then the product that's completed. Hopefully you're able to move it quickly out of your facility and it doesn't sit for too long. But it is quite possible that you have some boxes of inventory that are ready to ship out when a customer's placed an order for product that moves very quickly. There's the time involved. You make many different drugs, but they're only on a couple of different line systems. So you constantly have scheduling challenges of what's going to run on any given line at any given point in day. And I'm sure that you have customers saying, hey, can you make my order sooner? And then you have to reschedule your entire line system plan for the month to accommodate a rush order for something. And then on top of that, of course, is the financial constraints that every business faces. You have to buy the pieces that go into making the drugs, the APIs and chemical compounds. Some of them might be costly and have longer lead times. So you have to plan further ahead to make sure that you have the products available to you when you need them to make the drugs that you want to make, while at the same time managing the cost flow so that you can make sure that you can keep your business afloat. So just to kind of go back to our original wheel of some of the challenges that we face from an ERP perspective, the biggest one that I spent a lot of my time with as a planner was the planning of it. Whenever there was a new machine that we were building, it would be the lead time for a new product, for placing orders, for speaking to manufacturers to see, can you make this? Quality inspections that you had to do for test runs of it before you actually placed your final order. And even when you're replacing your order, there's financial challenges you need to keep in mind of, should I buy 5 of these? Should I buy 10 of these? It's cheaper to buy 10, but then you have to continually schedule out deliveries of it. And then, of course, there's inventory levels for some of the smaller components like hardware or the metal pieces we use frequently that are a little bit easier to manage from a spatial perspective. What do we have in stock already? I'm sure many of you face this challenge, even if you don't work in that department, when you're planning a big dinner, like for Thanksgiving, as we have in the US here. When is your frozen turkey going to arrive? You got to make sure you have time to thaw it out before you cook it. You need to see how many potatoes do you have in stock, how many carrots. That same sort of notion of planning your dinner goes into planning the production line as well. It's just kind of a little shift in perspective. Once you know what you have in stock, what you have on your shelf, or what you're going to need with a lead time on it, then you place purchase orders for it. Now, if you have an ERP system, you probably have some sort of logging that you can log into every day that you check for your products, and it'll tell you, hey, you're running low on this inventory based on the production schedule you have today. So your ERP system may be able to help with this. It may tell you this is when you should probably place orders for these things based on lead time, or hey, this is a late delivery, you need to follow up on it. But from a purchasing perspective, some of the additional challenges you face, even if you have an ERP system, is that you might have to log into multiple accounts to place purchase orders. For me, when I was placing purchase orders at this company, there were some organizations where if I wanted to buy hardware, I would log into a website and place the order directly through the website. It was very fast, very easy next day delivery, which was great for our production team. But from my perspective, it didn't tie back to my ERP system, which meant I had to log basically a fake purchase order in our system so that my inventory counts would be accurate, even though it wasn't tied into the purchase orders that I was actually placing through this external website. Sometimes I had to print them out and fax them to organizations. So sometimes you could just attach it as a PDF in an email. And so depending on what it was I was buying at any point in time, I had to manage different methodologies of placing the purchase orders based on the communication preferences of our suppliers. It's complicated, it's a timely process, but you have to just know how to get the orders into these different organizations so that you can get the components you need on time. And then expediting. I'm sure anyone who works in the planning department can tell you this is probably one of the most time-consuming and headache aspects of it. When you place a purchase order, did you get a confirmation back from the hardware company that delivers next day, or for the regular Joe person buying their things today, Amazon, right? If you buy something, you're probably going to get it in the next day or two. You probably got a confirmation email, which is great. But if you didn't, did my order get through? Is it even planned? Is it getting produced? Or for some of the components that were more complex, that involved lots of machinery processes, that had lots of steps along the way, is it on time? How are we doing with that delivery schedule? Are they going to meet their dates that they need to meet? Do I need to get paperwork lined up, like for customs border crossings, that maybe I didn't have done in advance? But as we get closer to the delivery, there's extra steps that maybe you need to manage. The other challenge of this is, of course, things aren't getting delivered on time. So you're constantly making phone calls or sending emails, trying to get things pulled in sooner because maybe your production is ahead of schedule. Or alternatively, sometimes you need to push out things, as I mentioned earlier, where the frames would kind of get switched around. So I would say, okay, hey, frame supplier, I need you to switch these forecasts. I need you to change the order of the deliveries on it. Can you do that? And how close to these dates can you be so that from our manufacturing perspective, we can do what we need to do and still meet the deadlines of our ultimate end customer? And it was a very small organization that I worked for, which was great from a learning perspective. I wore many, many hats. And sometimes I wore the hat of receiving. It was a lot of fun. So I would run on down to the dock if I knew, based on my daily stand-up meetings with our production guys, that, hey, there's some critical component that they need to get in stock today, but maybe they don't have it yet. So it's coming in at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Great. If it is, then I would run on down the dock myself and I would find the shelf based on, the tracking number that I got in whatever email, or if there was a delivery person, sometimes the sales guy himself would walk it into the building so that I could take it from them and I would bring it to the receiving dock. So that Sal, our receiver guy, could receive it into our system so that it would log into the inventory process of our ERP and that we could move it through the line. Now, again, for those more complex components, they're heavily machined items, you need to make sure that everything passes the quality bar, which is always a dreaded process for the more complex components because they're pricey and have long lead times. So hopefully it does pass the quality check and you can move on with your day. You can pass it on to the kitting department and walk it on in with my bunny suit and the hairnet and all that to get it delivered to the production team so they could build what they need to build as the next step. But sometimes it doesn't pass the quality bar. I will never forget the day that we finally got that giant frame delivered in and it was dented. So I had to go back to the plastics company and to the machining company in Canada and reschedule everything to see how can we get this fixed? How quickly can we get this bump smoothed out? Is this something that we need to return, which goes back the other way across the border? As you can imagine, it was a little bit of a nightmare. Thankfully, some of our mechanics, machining people on site also did a little bit of automobile body work on the side and they were able to smooth it out for us pretty well. But now we need to get the customer involved and get their approval on it. It's a whole nightmare if you have a quality error and you have to kind of go back through the process again. So hopefully you don't, but those are just some of the challenges you face from the receiving perspective. And then of course, again, there's the invoicing side of it to kind of help close the loop on that. Did you receive the product in? Did you get it on time? How many did you receive? Are you getting billed for 7 when you only received 5? From the financing department, they need to go through our accounting and match all of the receipts they have to the invoices they have. They also need to manage payment terms. It's kind of a whole nother perspective of lead time and planning that they have to do, but just from a cash flow perspective. For each one of your suppliers, they need to get paid. How do they get paid? They need to manage maybe wire transfers that need to get happen. Maybe it's a check that they mail, who knows? But based on the different suppliers that you work with, same from purchasing side, where you have to place orders in different methodologies, the finance and accounting teams similarly have their own challenges for delivering the financial payment methods. So how do we solve this problem? Well, hopefully Mint can help solve some of that for you. So what can Mint do? Hopefully Mint can help solve some of these problems. From a planning perspective, it can help automate some of these processes. Again, if you have an ERP system, you probably have some sort of inventory management system already that tells you how many you have in stock. Hopefully you have audits done throughout the year that can help to make sure that your inventory balance as reported is accurate based on the physical goods in your system. But if you don't have an ERP, if you have spreadsheets you're managing, you may have additional challenges on that. You want to make sure that you have inventory information that is accurate and frequently reported back to you so that you know what you have in stock, what you need to buy. Furthermore, for your customers who are maybe downstream of you, the people who ultimately bought those big machines from us had to send us forecasting and their plans for what their needs were throughout the year. The sooner we have inventory from them or their forecasting plans from them, the sooner we can plan our inventories accurately, our forecast accurate, and pass that information downstream. From the purchasing perspective, I mentioned that I had many, many challenges with placing orders in different methodologies, whether it was faxing, emailing. I didn't have to send any paper ones, thank goodness, but maybe someone does that today. From a Mint perspective, you can place the purchase order one time through the method that works best for you and your organization, and then TraceLink takes care of the rest of it. TraceLink, that's what we do today. We already see different delivery needs for different companies that we work with throughout the compliance supply chain perspective. It's the same thing from a purchase order placement. If one system at the end needs an X12, another one needs an EDIFACT document, one of them wants a PDF, we can manage all of that for you. All you have to do is send the one purchase order into TraceLink. TraceLink dispenses it out as needed for the end user without having the additional burden on the purchasing department. From an expediting perspective, PO acknowledgement is another document that's commonly used in the EDI world today, and it's an automated response to that purchase order. So it'll be a lot more synchronized, and you can check it a little bit more easily of, did you get an acknowledgement for this purchase order? Did you get acknowledgement from your suppliers that, yes, they got their purchase order, here are the dates that they are committing to, here's the quantity that they're committing to. And we can help you feed that back into your ERP system if you have one to help streamline that process so that it can be a little bit more automated and the department can spend more time doing other things. And then again, there's the forecast planning of schedules and responses that we support today. When I needed to change the delivery of the frame schedule based on my customers' needs, then I could send this in theory through the forecast planning tool. And then I could get that response automatic back through the TraceLink module to help expedite that process. So I would have one system of record instead of having multiple spreadsheets on the side hanging all over my desk to make sure that we were on time with the expected process. Next step would be receiving. I think we're all familiar with getting that email today when you place your order on Amazon or whatever online system, and you get, hey, your item shipped. Here's a tracking number. Even better when you get, hey, your item is delivered, and you get a picture of your front door. Hopefully it's your front door anyways. From that perspective, that's usually triggered by an advanced ship notice in the online retail system. Through TraceLink, we can support that again today. So for those items that are getting delivered, we can loop that back into your system if the advanced ship notice is provided to TraceLink from your suppliers. So you'll have that input, you'll have that system to see, here's the items that I purchased, here is the acknowledgement of it, and furthermore, here is the planned shipment delivery of that. Here's even a tracking number that you can use, or if it's coming on a truck, you can follow the bill of lading through the process to have more insight into when is your product coming. You know that it's shipped because you have the ship notification. You know what's on that truck, what's on that planned delivery. You'll have better insight into what is coming and when. On our roadmap, we also have return authorization. It's not in development quite yet, but it is something that we're planning to do to help that return process when you do have quality issues. As again, we mentioned, it's a pain when something doesn't go exactly as planned and you have to return it. Sometimes you need to have more communication. There's a whole process that needs to be followed with many people. It's cumbersome. But hopefully the return authorization communication, it can help streamline that process. And then to close the loop, we bring it back to the invoicing side. From the invoicing department, kind of like we have with purchasing, it's just one. There's just one message that gets sent into the invoicing system, and TraceLink takes care of delivery downstream. Depending on whether it's going to some NetSuite system, whether it's going to an SAP system, whether again it's an IDOC or it's an X12, TraceLink can manage all those outbound maps for the accounting department so that they don't need to manage all those different processes. On our roadmap, we also have additional transactions planned like remittance advice, credit and debit adjustments, just again to make that life more easier and hopefully more streamlined. With all this functionality that we're supporting here, hopefully it helps to ease some of those constraints we see in the middle, like money, time, and space. If I have better insight into the forecasting that I'm doing with those frames, with the schedules, then I can spend more time maybe negotiating better pricing with the suppliers, instead of having to track down deliveries with my spreadsheets and all of that sort of thing. Space, we wouldn't have multiple frames backed up on our dock. We wouldn't have surprise deliveries showing up and taking up that valuable dock and inventory space because you have more insight into the planning process. And then with all of those pieces put together, you have better cash flow, better management of money from your financing department. So kind of just taking a deeper dive into that again, here's just sort of another view. From a planning perspective, all of these functionalities, the forecasting tools, the inventory reports, help the planning side of it to know what's in stock, what your future demands may be. From the purchasing department, our streamlined PO placement with our single methodology. From the functional acknowledgement, that supports expected delivery dates and quantities so that you can better forecast, maybe place additional purchase orders as needed, maybe even find alternatives if alternatives exist from other suppliers. And then forecasting tools can aid in communicating that constant push and pull we see with the just-in-time demand. Next up, again, as I mentioned, there's receiving. So you'll have the advanced ship notice to provide better insight. And then again, we have our future technology to help with the return process. And then finally, the invoicing. That single methodology can solve a lot of time to make sure that invoices are going where they need to go, to who, and in the methods that they demand. So to kind of bring it all back to Mint with our beautiful diagram, how can Mint help support you? Whether or not your system is running on an ERP plan today, or whether it is more of a spreadsheet management process that you have internally, either way, you have some sort of internal process that is supported most likely through some technology today. But how can we help you? Well, one of the challenges that I mentioned that we constantly face is that push and pull, the timing of things. So to have more instant, more responsive communications can help to have more insight into that process and hopefully streamline it to allow your employees to have better time management with their day. And then one of the other challenges that we face a lot, specifically on the purchasing side where I worked, and then from the accounting side of that, is that you have different formats that are needed downstream or upstream, and how to manage that communication. When you have point-to-point connections, it can be a lot. You're constantly having to update, mapping or certificate information. You have to just know as part of onboarding training of your employees how to communicate with these different parties involved in the supply chain system. But if you have something like Mint to help aid in that communication, then it's just one less thing that has to be managed. That's what we do at TraceLink. We manage delivering information to multiple systems that maybe aren't capable of B2B integration and the ones that are, but for our customers, it's all the same thing. So hopefully this is some informative information. If you want to have any questions, I am certainly open to help discussing questions at this point. If you want to review any topics, I'd be happy to do so. And if you want to just talk about semiconductor manufacturing, I'm also happy to discuss that as well, but probably less so in this forum. So I guess I open it up to you guys.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was really interesting, and also bringing your experience into it. That was really good to hear. I have a couple of questions. I just
Sure.
wanted to know, first of all, what were some of the most cumbersome, manual and time-intensive processes that you wish you could digitize?
Certainly managing the frame schedule was one of them. When it came to changes happening, so that process as it happened for us was the customer service department who sat on the other side of the little cubicle wall from me would get the updates from our downstream customer on when the supply was changing, whether they wanted a 200 or a 300, how many orders were they placing, and then the delivery schedule for all of that. Once that happened and our management agreed to it, then that information would get put into the ERP system, and that would sort of trickle down throughout the entire purchasing department to see, okay, this is where we need to place more orders, or you need to shift your schedules. But I quite literally had a spreadsheet hanging above my desk. It was a little calendar that had different dates. It was color coded to the different frames. So the first thing I would do is open up that frame schedule in the ERP system and see, where do we stand? How do I need to shift this? Sometimes if it's only a couple days or two, maybe you didn't need to change the whole schedule of delivery, but you would also need to make sure that the frame that is on the dock is in fact going to be leave, which means production on the current system cannot be delayed. There are key components that are involved in that, maybe, and that's part of the challenge of being in the planning department. And then again, as I mentioned, it was very, very spreadsheet based. So I would send that spreadsheet email to the frame provider in Canada, and they would confirm what dates they could support and which ones they couldn't. If they needed to shift the dates, then we would need to shift that back to the customer. Once the customer agreed to those dates, then we would again need to shift the dates out of everything in the ERP system for those major components, including the delivery to the plastics company. From the plastic company perspective, they also needed to confirm the spreadsheet communication. So it was just a lot of sending spreadsheets back and forth to multiple different companies, and the impact that can have. I mean, the time it takes to manage that communication, really, really fighting to get deliveries when people are pushing back on it, really having to sometimes add financial incentives to the communications just so you can make sure that you can get the products that you need on time. It was just a lot of time and effort that went into it. And anytime you're manually maintaining spreadsheets, of course, there's an opportunity for error. And it's just a constant communication back and forth, which would have been a lot easier if I had something like Mint to kind of automatically send that information through.
Yeah, it certainly sounds very labor intensive. So, but how much time did the team spend kind of chasing information, correcting mistakes, or
Chasing information was probably the hardest one, especially chasing deliveries. And I mean, that was what we spent the 40 hours a week doing. Placing an order is fairly quick. I mean, you had your ERP system that showed you this is what we need. You kind of grouped it throughout the day based on your strategies and order deadlines to say, I'd order this in the morning, this in the afternoon, this in the evening. But the rest of your time throughout the day would be spent just trying to get deliveries on things. Every single morning, I had a stand-up meeting with the manufacturing team to see kind of what key landmarks they were facing in their production and what key components were typically tied to that. So, there'd be like the wiring team that would come in and do their thing, but then after the wiring team, there was another major component that they needed to install in the system to move it forward. Usually something that was complicated, that was expensive, that had multiple processes. Maybe it had some hard coating or some anodized plating or something on it. And so delivery of those components would then need to be scheduled for very, very strategic points in time in the process. And multiple phone calls would need to be made with my suppliers to make sure that even if they did commit to a date, are we still on track for that? And so that would be easily half of the day, if not more than that, was spent just making sure that certain deliveries were on time. If they weren't, how to get them in sooner. Sometimes you need to escalate that to your management team so that you can have your manager call in and speak to the importance of delivery on it at that financial incentive that I mentioned. It's just, that's a huge part of the day for me. And then some organizations who are larger probably have a whole planning department where that's what they spend their time doing. As a buyer, I could have spent that time maybe managing better contracts, sourcing other suppliers, but I didn't really have the time to do that because so much of the day was spent with the expediting and receiving process.
Yeah, and writing up the processes. Did you document the processes? Were they?
Yeah,
Yeah.
To
Sounds
some
very
degree, yes.
common. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for some of it, you obviously you have, training when you come in, but when it came to managing deliveries of certain things, some of it, like I mean, the spreadsheet for the frames I managed on my own, it was something, a system that I came up with that worked best for me and the suppliers I was working with. So you have, as I'm sure we see with a lot of companies, there's the process that you're trained on, the process that you follow, but that may not be the process that is really the best for your organization as time moves forward. So you need to kind of develop new methodologies, which can be time constraining and cumbersome, but it's also sometimes necessary to have a more streamlined process in the end, although it does mean going back through and changing your documentation. So when you're training new team members, you have to go back through all of that information load. And also, you just have to have notes in your different accounts to say, well, when you're sending a purchase order, make sure you email it to this person. And if this person's out of office, then try this person. Or this organization, again, requires faxing, or you need a wire payment to this organization. Maybe they're international, which means you have to go to the bank at a certain time of day. There's little nuances on that we see throughout the supply chain industry. And it's just kind of internal knowledge that you harvest and you kind of keep notes on in your internal accounts.
Yeah, and hope that it gets passed on, right?
Exactly. Hope that it gets passed on. Hope that communication continues to go through as best it can. And if not, then what do you do? How do you have a new plan? How do you communicate that internally? It's just part of the challenges of the day-to-day life. And that's something again where Mint would have been really handy. I wouldn't have had to have that communication, that internal notes of, well, you need to communicate with this person, make sure you do it before this time so they're not out of office, or you need to send it versus one method versus another. All that information can be tracked in a centralized system, and it would have been very handy to have that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I guess it's just fascinating that, how archaic it could be or it has been.
Right. I think it
And
was
yeah.
2010 and I'm using a fax
Yes.
machine, it's
Wow. Thank you for answering my questions. I'm just going to see if anyone on the line has any questions for Beth.
I don't have a question per se, but more of a comment. But I think it was overall it was a good introduction to me and understanding of the processes that happens. Coming from an MRO world, I understand we had a huge MRO software that integrated with a lot of different other software internally, of course, like invoicing and purchasing. And I can see how trying to integrate that outside of our own company into other companies would be a nightmare. And this certainly does provide a solution.
That's the hope. That's the hope. Yeah, and it's a challenge that's definitely faced. I mean, I mentioned frequently spreadsheets. For those organizations who maybe haven't invested in our ERP system, how is that information kept? It's kept in spreadsheets. So do you have a centralized drive where that information is stored? Especially when it comes to manufacturing things that have multiple but common components, right? There were 3 different or 4 different people in my department at different times in the company. And while I was the one buyer for a couple of our customer bases, we did use a lot of common components. If you think about, again, it's machinery, so like screws and nuts and bolts, that hardware side of it, we would have hundreds of them in stock, sure. But is there a way to maybe strategically use the same hardware components, the same screws and the same nuts and bolts so that, we have one bulk purchase? That's used across the company for all of that. You need to have that communication with your different members. So what spreadsheets do they have to track this information? And then again, from like the purchase order side of it, how do you share that purchase order information with your invoicing department if you don't have an ERP system, if you are working with spreadsheets? So in those situations, which some of our customers are certainly facing, it's a very, very process heavy conversation, and hopefully Mint can help streamline some of that, but at least giving more of a centralized view of information so that everybody can start talking the same language and using the same platform to see that information coming in and going out as needed for each of the participants in the departments.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Beth, for sharing your knowledge and experience. It's really good bringing this to life with stories that you've had in the past, how it's been used. And if anyone does have any questions following the Tech Talk, please reach out to tracinguniversity@tracing.com. We can try and answer them, but if not, we'll I'll speak to you, Beth, and see if we can
absolutely
respond to those questions. But thank you, that was really good. And for those, if you we are going to be posting this on Tracing University as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take
This
care.
was
Bye.
very
Bye.
informative. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.